What would you do if you could suddenly master anything and everything you wanted in the blink of an eye? Would you use your newfound skills to help others? Help yourself? Or would you use those powers to change the things around you, change the world, and ultimately change all of mankind? This is one of the many questions posed by the fictional device known as the Neuromod in the game Prey 2017, and is one that not only you, the player, end up answering by the end of the game, but is something that this video will explore via the aforementioned Neuromods. And perhaps is a question that through the length of this video will reveal a great many things about not only what it means to be human, but what it means to exist. Roll that intro. As in my previous videos, I've opened this one with a rather profound and vague question. A question which in the Prey universe is something that has a tangible answer due to what implicates it. With that implication, of course, being the Neuromod, and as such, the topic for this video. To start us off then, what exactly is a Neuromod, and more importantly, how does it make it so that someone can master things instantaneously? Well, to briefly answer that question before getting into it a bit later, a Neuromod, short for neuromodifier, is a device that in the Prey universe allows for a person to essentially take a skill that some other person would have known, and learn it to the same degree that that other person would have known it. As to how the entire process works is something that, like I just said, I'll get to shortly. But before all of that, I think that in order to even start discussing how Neuromods work, it's best to learn how they came to be. When discussing how Neuromods came to be, I think the first thing to do would be to create a distinction between what I'll call old versus new Neuromods. With the old ones being a reference to the Neuromods before they were the sleeker and subsequently less painful ocular version that we see in the game. That out of the way, Neuromods were an invention that is very recent in the Prey universe, having only been invented by Transtar in the few years prior to when the game is meant to take place aboard Talos 1, 2030 to be exact. Though it should be noted that, as previously mentioned, Neuromods did exist before in a different capacity, and were injected via the spinal cord and not the eye, which is one of the many improvements made by Transtar to the original design. It would be from this kind of iterative approach that Neuromods would be brought from their rather grotesque start, the part involving spinal injections, into the modern era, where almost all employees aboard Talos 1 had some form of Neuromod installed. And an even greater possibility that many people on Earth had Neuromods publicly available to them as well. But for every great thing that the Neuromods brought to the table, even with their vast improvements, there definitely still remains a very dark stain in relation to where the ingredients for them are and were derived from. As to be able to instantly remap the mind, something was needed. Something that was both human and not. This something came in the form of what we know in the game as exotic material, but in our reality is really just a combination of Typhon and human biology that's been harvested and prepared to work as a sort of bridge for the processes that the Neuromod device needs to perform, in order to transfer a skill from one person to the next. This exotic material would end up becoming one of the darkest secrets of Transtar, as obtaining it was something that Transtar could have gone about in a far more ethical and humane way. For you see, in order to obtain exotic material, a human must be placed in a chamber with some sort of Typhon, usually mimics, then have that Typhon released on them and use their body to multiply or transform, with the result being the coveted exotic material after a brief extraction process of the Typhon. This on its own may have been the breaking point for many, had Transtar not gone about it in a very shady way. That being that they used various so-called criminals from around the world to perform said procedure on, with the guise that taking in the criminals was to help rehabilitate them and reintroduce them into society, something which almost never, if not never, happened. On top of all this, the practice of using unwilling subjects to get exotic material may have continued far into the future, had the events surrounding the game not occurred, as Morgan, at some point in the game, gets the opportunity to wrong their rights through some pretty hard decision making, though as to what they end up choosing is a story for another time. Now that origin and rather shady production portion of the Neuromods is out of the way, I can use this as a segue into how Neuromods are just generally produced from start to finish. and at the same time talk about how they work, which some may have already figured out by now. To start with how Neuromods are made then, most of the time, it all comes down to the skill needed or wanted for production. In this case, let's take the example of the ability to play piano, which was actually something that was being worked on prior to the events of the game. How the process started in this case was with a person being brought in that knew how to play the piano, which in this case, and pretty much every other case, is usually someone extremely skilled. From there, they were, or are, brought to a sort of recording studio within the station, where they are told to do the tasks that they in particular are good at, with the person themselves being hooked up to various different devices that measure their brain activity, and even more specifically, which neural pathways are being activated when said skill is being performed. After this process is over, a map is made of the performer's brain, otherwise known as a connectome. This connectome allows for the team responsible for the Neuromod's production to then start figuring out how best to optimize certain parts of the connectome itself, if needed, and then put into a state that it's ready to be sent to fabrication to be put into the actual device itself. It should be noted from this then that the actual recording part of the skill doesn't necessitate for the person who is having their skill recorded to be able to actually perform those said skills, only for the pathways to exist. As when put into someone else, the skill will work despite the fact that the original recorder wasn't able to perform that skill when they recorded it. On top of this, there are also people with a very rare degenerative nerve disorder known as paraplexus that are recommended to not record or even use neuromods in the first place, as there could be various potential risks in the creation of a neuromod from a person with said disease, most keenly the disease being transferred via the neuromod. From here, it may start becoming fairly apparent as to how neuromods work, specifically in how they are essentially high-speed connectome remappers, where the neural map of the person that's recorded the skill is used as a template via the actual mod itself, to do the aforementioned remapping. It's then that things like the exotic material, as well as the paraplexus problems also come into play, as it turns out that the only reason that such a quick and seamless remapping of a person's neural connections is even possible in the first place is due to the fact that something in the typhon, perhaps in their molecular makeup, combined alongside human cells and DNA, allows for the human mind to rapidly accept the creation of what is essentially false memory and experiences as those that it itself had experienced at some point. In this way, neuromods not only end up rebuilding potentially the physical makeup of the human brain via the rerouting of various neurotransmitters and how often they occur, but at the same time is capable of making it so that that said changed brain is changed in an entirely physical way, with some changes obviously being far more drastic than others. It's also for this reason that degenerative diseases like paraplexus pose a great many problems to both the creation and use of neuromods, as if it's possible to rebuild the structure of the human mind via the use of neuromods, then it's entirely possible that diseased connectomes have the possibility of recreating that very disease within the person that they're used on. All of that then leads us to the question posed in the intro of this video, and potentially the long-term effects that neuromods may have on the human mind. That is to say that in the actual game of Prey 2017, after discovering how to record various typhon abilities, and subsequently, to quote Alex Yu, put what they can do into us via the use of neuromods, Morgan Yu undergoes the lengthy process of testing out how exactly the human mind changes and reacts when given access to typhon powers. It's through this that we're constantly faced with the question as to how much the use of typhon neuromods and their abilities have really begun to affect Morgan. As if neuromods can truly remap a person's brain to the extent that it rebuilds it in one way or another, then what's happening to Morgan's brain? Is it possible that they're no longer even Morgan to begin with? Something that harkens back to the memory twin paradox. Or is it simply that this is but something similar to a person learning a bunch of new skills and subsequently practicing those new skills, but at an accelerated pace? All of these questions slowly culminate and build up as we play through the campaign, and while I won't spoil what the ending of the game is, though most may already know at this point, the game's answer to those questions is profound, and even attempts to flip those questions on their heads when least expected. It's with this statement, or rather conclusion, that I feel I should begin bringing this video to an end. As with the introduction of the Neuromod and the world of Prey, a great many other concepts are brought into the fray as well, with many being answered and even more branching out into different open-ended questions with no real answers. In the end though, the concept of the Neuromod is something that, while not wholly realistic, is heavily based in reality and modern day science, as not only have we already begun to understand the makeup of the brain and memories, But with every step that takes us deeper into the concept of our own minds, we come closer and closer to discovering what consciousness truly is. Though that, in and of itself, is even now quite a distant ways away, as it is in Prey. So with that, I think that's a perfect place to end the story of Neuromods, as not only have I covered their origin, how they're manufactured, and how they work, but also why they work, their effects on the mind, and even what the concept of them means for the greater understanding of the mind, at least in the Prey universe. So if you liked the video, please leave a like, and if you disliked it, leave a dislike, but please do tell me why. And if you're really invested after watching this video, throw me a bone and perhaps subscribe. Anyways, thanks for watching, and until the next video, never forget that it's all just a dream that we keep having. Coolio out.